My phone vibrated on the nightstand at exactly 2:01 a.m., not the soft buzz of a casual notification, but the sharp, urgent vibration that feels like it's cutting straight through your spine instead of just waking you up. I remember the time because I always glance at the clock before I reach for my phone in the dark, a habit drilled into me from years of restless sleep. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything, but first, if you enjoy stories like this, you want to be part of the 10% viewers who click on the like button. It makes us really happy. If you are yet to subscribe to our channel, kindly support us today by subscribing to this channel. This helps us to bring you more beautiful stories. It will be great to tell us where you are watching us from in the comment section. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the hallway clock. Everyone was asleep. Everyone was safe, or at least I believed they were. When I saw my father's name glowing on the screen, my first thought was that something must have happened to him. He never texted at this hour. Never. My hand shook slightly as I unlocked the phone, not from fear yet but from confusion. The message was short. Brutally short. Get out now. Grab your sister and run. Don't trust your mother. For several seconds, my brain refused to accept the meaning of the words. It felt like trying to read a foreign language using letters I recognized but could not interpret together. My father was calm by nature, steady even in crisis. For him to send something like this, without explanation, without context, felt impossible. I reread the message again and again, waiting for a follow-up that never came. My thumbs hovered over the screen, ready to call him, but an instinct deeper than logic stopped me. If he was warning me not to trust my mother, then calling him might already be unsafe. I sat up slowly in bed, listening to the house with a new kind of attention. Every sound suddenly felt amplified. The creak of the floor in the distance, the soft rush of air through the vents, the muffled snore of the dog sleeping near the back door. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood very carefully so the mattress wouldn't squeak. My heart was pounding hard enough that I was certain someone would hear it. I glanced once more at the text, hoping foolishly that it would change. It didn't. The words stared back at me with cold certainty. Whatever my father had discovered, he believed it was urgent enough to tear his own family apart in the middle of the night to protect us. The first person I thought about was my sister. She was 15, still half child and half adult, old enough to sense when something was wrong but young enough to freeze when panic arrived too fast. Her bedroom was at the end of the hallway, just past our parents' room. That detail suddenly felt like a cruel design flaw in the architecture of our house. I moved toward her door barefoot, each step slow and deliberate, my body tense as though walking across glass. I could hear my parents' muted breathing through their closed door as I passed. That sound, familiar, comforting thousands of times before, now sent a shiver through me. My father's warning echoed in my head with every step. Don't trust your mother. I opened my sister's door just enough to slip inside and closed it quietly behind me. She was curled under her blanket, one arm flung across her pillow, breathing softly. For a moment, the normalcy of the scene almost broke my resolve. I considered waking her gently, telling her it was a false alarm, that everything was fine, that we could go back to sleep and deal with whatever crisis came in the morning. That temptation lasted exactly 1 second. I remembered the absolute urgency in my father's words. I sat on the edge of her bed and shook her shoulder just hard enough to wake her quickly but not violently. She stirred, confused, blinking at me in the dim light. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "We have to leave. Right now," I whispered back. Her confusion sharpened instantly into fear. "Leave where?" "It's the middle of the night." I showed her my phone. The glow lit up her face as she read the message. The moment she reached the last line, "Don't trust your mother," her expression changed from confusion to shock. She started to speak, then stopped herself, glancing instinctively toward the door. We both knew the rule in the house. Nights were quiet and questions were asked in the morning. This night did not belong to rules. I told her to grab shoes, a jacket, and her phone. Nothing else. She obeyed without arguing, which frightened me more than if she had screamed. We moved back into the hallway together, barely breathing. Our parents' door was still closed. The light beneath it was off, but that gave me no comfort at all. I guided my sister down the stairs with my hand on her elbow, both of us memorizing every dark corner and shadow as if they might suddenly move. The front door seemed impossibly loud in my mind even before I touched it. I turned the handle millimeter by millimeter, holding my breath until the latch released with only the faintest click. The cold night air rushed into the house, sharp and real, as if the outside world were the only place left that might still be honest. We were on the porch when I heard a sound behind us. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My sister froze, her fingers tightening painfully around my arm. For a split second, I thought the porch light would snap on and my mother's voice would call down, half asleep and half suspicious, asking what we were doing. It didn't happen. The light stayed off. The house remained dark and silent. But the warning from my father burned even hotter in my chest now. Whatever was happening inside that house, it was not safe for us to return. We slipped into the night and ran. Not full speed at first because terror makes you cautious before it makes you reckless. We jogged down the street, past familiar houses that now looked like strangers in the dark, past parked cars that reflected the moon in dull, watchful shapes. Only when we reached the corner did we truly run, lungs burning, hearts exploding against our ribs, our breaths coming out in ragged bursts. We didn't speak. We didn't look back. We just ran until the night itself seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of us. When we finally stopped, we were several blocks away, hidden behind a row of closed shops at the edge of the neighborhood. My sister bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping for air. I leaned against the brick wall, my legs trembling so badly I wasn't sure they would hold. The city was quiet at this hour, but it was not empty. Somewhere a distant car passed. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere life continued as if nothing in our world had just fractured in half. Only then did my sister whisper the question we had both been carrying since we left the house. What does Dad think Mom did? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and finally called my father. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he answered. And the sound of his voice, low, strained, nothing like the steady man I had known all my life, told me this was only the beginning of something far worse than a midnight escape. My father did not speak immediately when he answered the call. At first all I heard was his breathing, uneven, shallow, nothing like the controlled calm that had defined him my entire life. That alone terrified me more than the message itself. I whispered his name into the phone, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow give us away, even though we were already several blocks from the house. My sister stood beside me, arms wrapped tightly around her body, eyes scanning every dark corner as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows at any moment. When my father finally spoke, his voice was hoarse as if he had been swallowing panic for hours before forcing himself to warn us. "Are you both safe right now?" he asked. I told him where we were and he paused for a long moment before saying, "Good. Stay there until I tell you where to go next." The way he said next made it clear that returning home was no longer an option. My sister grabbed my sleeve lightly, whispering my name, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" she mouthed. I told her quietly that Dad would explain soon, but even as I said it, I wondered how much of the truth he would actually be able to give us over the phone. He explained slowly and carefully that we could not stay in the open for long, that someone, he would not yet say who, might realize we were gone. He told us to move 2 more streets over to the small all-night convenience store near the highway, where we could blend in with the occasional late-night travelers. "If your mother calls you," he added, "do not answer. Turn off location sharing. Trust me on this." We moved again, faster this time, drawn forward by raw survival instinct rather than cautious fear. The sidewalk seemed endless, the streetlights harsh and unforgiving, casting long shadows that looked like people where no people stood. My sister stumbled once, catching herself just in time on my arm. She tried to apologize through her shaking breath, and I told her not to speak unless she had to. Silence felt safer than reassurance. When we reached the convenience store, the harsh fluorescent lights felt like we had stepped into a different world. One that smelled of coffee and dust and microwaved food instead of secrecy and danger. We took seats near the back corner, pretending to scroll through our phones like ordinary teenagers who had simply wandered in too late at night. Only then did my father finally begin to explain what he could. He spoke in fragments at first, careful not to use names, careful not to give details that might somehow be intercepted. He told me that he had discovered something about Mom that he had never known before, something that had frightened him enough to believe that if she realized he knew, she might make choices that none of us could undo. He said he had been gathering pieces for weeks without fully understanding what they meant, and that only that night had the final truth become undeniable. When I asked him what he had found, his silence came back heavy and loaded. "I'm not ready to say it out loud yet," he finally said. "I need to get you somewhere safe first." My sister listened silently, her face pale under the store's cold lighting. When I placed the phone slightly closer to her so she could hear his voice, she flinched at the sound of him, as if realizing for the first time how serious this was. She whispered into the phone, "Is Mom dangerous?" There was another long pause. "I don't know what she is capable of when cornered," he said honestly, "and that's what scares me most." His words sent a chill through me that no night air ever could. Danger was no longer abstract. It had potential. It had proximity. We waited in that corner of the store for nearly an hour, sipping cheap bottled drinks I barely tasted, pretending to be ordinary while my entire sense of reality quietly unraveled. Customers came and went. Truck drivers, a tired woman in hospital scrubs, 2 college kids laughing too loudly as they bought snacks. None of them knew that 2 terrified siblings sat just 20 feet away, running not from strangers, but from the one person in the world they had been taught never to fear. Every time the door chimed, my body tensed. Every approaching silhouette felt like a threat. I stopped counting entrances after 20, because the anticipation was becoming unbearable. Finally, my father called back. He told us that we needed to leave the city entirely for the night and head to his old friend's place outside town, someone my mother did not know well and would not think to contact. He described the route carefully, emphasizing which roads to avoid and which public transportation options would be safest. The precision of his instructions told me he had thought through the possibility of this moment before ever sending that first message. That terrified me more than anything else, that he had known escape might become necessary long before we did. My sister and I moved again, this time into unknown territory. The bus ride felt endless, every rotation of the wheels echoing the relentless movement of our lives away from something familiar and into something undefined. We sat pressed close together, neither of us speaking. I could feel the subtle trembling in her body through the thin fabric of her jacket. I wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, but the words would not form honestly in my mouth. Promises spoken without certainty feel like lies, and I had just learned how destructive lies could be. As city lights faded into long stretches of darkness, my mind began filling the silence with memories of my mother that suddenly felt distorted. Her laughter at the dinner table. Her gentle voice when we were sick. The way she kissed our foreheads before bed when we were younger. None of those memories aligned with the terror we were now living inside. I kept searching them for hidden warning signs that might finally make sense in this new light. Raised voices, sudden mood shifts, unexplained absences. But all I could find were the ordinary imperfections of a human being. That contradiction made the fear sharper. If my own memories could not protect me, then nothing truly could. We arrived at my father's friend's small house just before dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten at the horizon, the world poised between night and morning, danger and a fragile kind of safety. The door opened quickly when we knocked, as if they had been waiting for us the entire time. We were ushered inside without questions, immediately enveloped by warmth, dim lights, and the quiet gravity of adults who understood when not to ask yet. Only then, when the door was locked behind us, did my knees finally give way. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, my sister dropping down beside me, and for the first time since 2 a.m., I felt my body fully register the shock of what we had done. My father called shortly after to confirm we had arrived. I told him we were safe, and for the first time that night, his voice cracked openly with relief. We spoke briefly, carefully, in code more than clarity. Before hanging up, I asked him the question that had been clawing at me since the moment that text arrived. Was Mom like this all along? He paused. I don't know, he said quietly. But I know for sure now that I never truly knew her at all. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended, echoing in the space between the slow ticking of the clock and my sister's shaky breathing beside me. We did not sleep. Neither of us could. Dawn crept into the house slowly, revealing furniture, walls, family photos on shelves that belonged to strangers yet offered us shelter. In that thin daylight, the terror from the night before softened into something heavier and more complex: anticipation. Whatever truth my father had discovered was no longer just a warning. It was a revelation waiting to surface. And I knew with an unbearable certainty that when it did, it would change not only how we saw our mother but how we understood our entire childhood. Outside, the world began to wake. Inside, we waited for the truth to finally catch up with us. The call from my father came just after sunrise, when the pale light of morning had fully replaced the shadows of the night but had not yet warmed the fear that still clung to our bodies. My sister sat beside me on the small couch at his friend's house, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's life. We were both pretending not to listen when the phone rang, pretending we were calm enough to receive whatever explanation would finally follow the warning that had ripped us out of our home hours earlier. I answered quietly, stepping into the narrow hallway to give him a little privacy, though there was no part of this that could truly be private anymore. My father's voice sounded different in daylight. Still strained, still heavy, but no longer rushed by panic. It carried the exhausted steadiness of a man who had finally committed to a truth he had been circling for far too long. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, and I could hear him steady his breath before continuing. "What I'm about to tell you is not a theory anymore. It's not suspicion. It's confirmed." The word confirmed landed like a weight in my chest. For a moment I closed my eyes, bracing myself for something I couldn't yet name but already feared. He told me everything started with a routine financial irregularity, a charge that didn't make sense, tied to an account my mother was never supposed to have had access to. At first he assumed it was an error, one of those faceless digital glitches that resolve themselves with a few phone calls. But when he asked her about it casually, the way spouses often do without suspicion, her reaction was not confusion. It was panic. Controlled, brief, but unmistakable. She dismissed it quickly, too quickly, with an explanation that didn't quite fit the pattern of her normal defensiveness. That flicker of fear was the first crack in the version of her he had believed in for decades. Instead of letting it go, he did what he had always done when something didn't add up. He investigated quietly. Not because he wanted to catch her in a lie, he told me, but because something in her reaction had unsettled him deeply. Over several weeks, he traced transactions, unusual withdrawals, and digital footprints she had not realized were still visible. The picture that began to form was not one of a single mistake but of a long, carefully hidden pattern. Money had been moving through channels he did not recognize, to people he had never met, in amounts that did not align with anything resembling ordinary expenses. At first he thought it might be an affair. He said he almost wished that's all it had been. But what he uncovered instead was something colder and far more dangerous. My mother, the woman who had packed our lunches and signed our school forms and tucked us into bed at night, had been quietly involved in a network of financial manipulation that tied into identity laundering and asset concealment. She had used false documentation to open accounts under multiple names. She had moved significant sums of money through those accounts in ways that were structured to avoid detection thresholds. She had done it carefully, patiently, for years. What was she doing with the money? I asked, my voice barely steady. My father was quiet for several seconds before answering. Not just moving it, he said. She was hiding it. And in some cases, using it to ruin other people's lives without them knowing. He explained that some of the accounts were linked to individuals who no longer existed under their original identities. Others belonged to people who were unaware they were being named as financial entities at all. Their identities had been used without their knowledge to shield larger operations behind smaller, disposable facades. I didn't fully understand all of the mechanics. I only understood the consequence. It was illegal on a scale that was not accidental. It was not desperation. It was deliberate design. What does that mean for us? I whispered. It means, he said quietly, that if she realizes I know, everything changes. People who live this kind of double life do not react like ordinary people when they are exposed. They disappear. They destroy. They rewrite narratives. And anyone who can reveal them becomes a liability. I went cold. He told me that he had confronted her internally many times in silence over the past few days, watching her behavior, listening for any sign that she suspected his discovery. She had not yet known that he had assembled enough evidence to make denial impossible. But something had shifted in her. She had begun deleting files, clearing messages, moving assets in sudden urgency. The structure she had so carefully maintained was being dismantled, by her own hand. That was when he understood that discovery was imminent, whether he acted or not. And that was when he realized we were no longer safely unaware. He told me that earlier that night, while pretending to sleep, he had overheard a phone call she thought he would not hear. She spoke in code, using names that meant nothing at first, but the tone stripped the words of any domestic softness. She was not the woman who called us for dinner. She was someone else entirely in that moment. Someone negotiating leverage, not explaining logistics. Someone discussing urgency, not inconvenience. And in that conversation she had mentioned moving the variables. My sister and I were the variables. When I stepped back into the living room and told my sister what our father had discovered, her face drained of color in a way that terrified me more than if she had screamed. "You mean Mom is a criminal?" she whispered. I nodded slowly, struggling to translate the magnitude of the truth into words that would not crush her. "Worse," I said finally. "She's someone who has been living two lives so well that even Dad didn't know which one he was married to." She covered her mouth with her hand and began to cry silently, her shoulders shaking in small, broken motions. I sat beside her and held her while the room filled with the weight of everything we had lost without even knowing it was leaving us. The image we had carried of our family was disintegrating piece by piece, and beneath it was something we had never consented to be part of. Our childhood had unfolded alongside secrets that never once asked our permission to exist. My father called again later that afternoon. He had contacted authorities quietly, carefully, through channels that would not immediately alert my mother. He had been advised not to return to the house and not to attempt any confrontation. What he had uncovered was already enough to initiate a formal investigation. The moment the process became visible, my mother would realize the truth was catching up to her. And when that happened, the safest place for my sister and me would be far from her reach. "Do you think she knows we're gone?" I asked. "Yes," he said quietly. "And she knows why." That knowledge sat between us like an unspoken final chapter to the life we once had. Nothing about our old routine, school mornings, family dinners, casual disagreements, would ever return in the shape it once held. It had all been resting on an illusion of safety that no longer existed. As the day stretched on, I began to reevaluate every memory I had of my mother with a new lens. Her insistence on controlling documents. Her fury when finances were mentioned. Her unexplained absences framed as errands. All of it assembled itself into a pattern I had never been meant to see. It was not that she had suddenly become dangerous. She had always been what she was. We had simply lived in the unlit hallway of her life, never opening the door that led into the room where the truth resided. My sister asked me later that evening if Mom had ever loved us. The question shattered something inside me because there was no clean answer. Love, I realized, can be real without being safe. Protection can be sincere without being sufficient. A person can care deeply for their children and still be the most dangerous force in their lives. I told her the only honest thing I could. I think she loved us in the way she knew how. But not in the way that keeps people from being hurt. Outside, the day ended as quietly as it had begun. Sunset painted the sky in soft colors that contradicted the violence of what had just infiltrated our reality. My phone was silent. No message from my mother. No demand. No frantic searching. That silence spoke louder than any confrontation could have. She was waiting. Calculating. Adjusting. And in that stillness, I understood with terrifying clarity that the real danger had not passed. It had only just been named. The knock came just after noon the next day, sharp and authoritative, cutting through the quiet of my father's friend's house like a knife through fabric. It was not the polite knock of a visitor. It was firm, practiced, undeniable. My sister stiffened instantly beside me on the couch, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket as if she might anchor herself to something solid. The friend who had taken us in paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing with cautious understanding even before peering through the side window. When she finally opened the door, two unfamiliar figures stood on the porch, plain clothes but unmistakable in purpose. Law enforcement. The moment I saw the posture of their bodies and the gravity in their expressions, I knew that whatever my father had set in motion was no longer quietly unfolding in the background. It had reached the surface. They spoke gently but directly. They confirmed our names, our relationship to my father, our connection to my mother. Each question felt like a nail being driven into the final coffin of the life we had known. My sister's hand was ice cold in mine as I answered. They told us that an investigation was now officially active and that my mother had been detained earlier that morning for questioning related to a complex financial network that extended far beyond what I could have imagined. The words multiple jurisdictions floated through the explanation like a sentence of their own. This was not a local issue that would blow over with a simple misunderstanding. Whatever she had built in secret had crossed lines that could not be erased with charm, denial, or domestic normalcy. When they escorted us to a secured location later that afternoon for our own protection, the weight of it finally settled on me in full. We were not just hiding from danger anymore. We were being shielded because danger had been confirmed. The reality that our mother, was now the subject of an active criminal investigation felt so absurd that my mind rejected it in waves. One moment I believed it completely. The next it felt like a nightmare I would wake from any second. My sister oscillated between silence and sudden, choking sobs that came without warning, each one sounding like it might steal her breath forever. That evening my father arrived under escort as well. The moment I saw him, the controlled walls he had maintained since the first warning finally collapsed. He held us both at once, his arms shaking as though the full cost of what he had done, what he had saved us from and what he had lost in the same breath, had finally reached him. He did not apologize for the escape. He apologized for the life he had unknowingly built on top of her secrets. Over and over he whispered how sorry he was for not seeing it sooner. I told him what I now believed with certainty, that his delay did not make him guilty, and his warning had made him a hero in the only way that mattered. Later that night he told us what had happened when authorities confronted her. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had not asked about us. Instead she had asked how much they knew. That detail hollowed something deep inside me. The mother I remembered would have demanded to know where her children were before anything else. The woman they arrested had weighed knowledge and leverage before she weighed love. In that single priority shift I saw the cleanest separation between who we thought she was and who she truly had been all along. As the investigation unfolded over the next days, the truth grew larger than the walls that were supposed to contain it. What began as financial manipulation widened into identity fraud, asset laundering, and multiple confirmed cases where innocent people's credit histories and personal records had been destroyed as collateral damage in her long-term strategy to remain invisible. The money she had moved was no longer abstract. It had faces attached to it. Victims who had lost homes, opportunities, reputations, sometimes without ever understanding how or why their lives had collapsed so suddenly. And there was something else. She had not acted alone. The network was small but deliberate. A handful of carefully selected associates who moved quietly, efficiently, and without emotional attachment. She had never been driven by desperation. She had been driven by control. Control over outcomes. Control over identities. Control over perception. Even control over our family's narrative, shaping what we saw and what we never thought to question. We were not just children in her life. We were camouflage. That realization was the most brutal of all. I thought back to every school form she insisted on filling out personally. Every document she demanded to be the sole guardian of. Every account she insisted on managing for convenience. It was not maternal efficiency. It was operational necessity. We had lived inside a cover she curated with loving gestures and domestic rituals so convincing that it blinded even the person who shared her bed for decades. When I finally asked whether she had intended to run, the answer came without hesitation. Yes. Plans had already been in motion. New documents prepared. Funds staged. Contacts arranged. The only variable she had not accounted for was my father's discovery occurring before she could execute a clean disappearance. His warning to us disrupted a carefully timed exit, forcing her into urgency instead of control. The authorities believed that had he not acted when he did, we might have woken up to an empty house and a mother who no longer existed under any identity we could trace. The echo of that possibility haunted me for nights to come. My sister asked once if Mom would come after us. The investigators did not lie. They told us it was unlikely not because she was incapable, but because she would prioritize survival over confrontation. People who live two lives do not fight to preserve the first one once the second is exposed. They abandon it without ceremony. That abandonment strangely hurt even more than the crimes. It meant that when forced to choose between us and herself, the decision had already been made long ago. The news did not break immediately, but when it did, it moved fast. Stories surfaced in fragmented, speculative bursts. Local woman linked to ongoing financial scheme. Our town buzzed with rumors that only barely brushed the surface of reality. Neighbors who had once waved from their driveways now whispered at grocery stores. Classmates stared with unfiltered curiosity when my sister returned to school under protective discretion. The life that had once been built on quiet obscurity was suddenly made of public questions. My mother never tried to contact us. Not once. No message. No letter. No apology. That absence spoke with a clarity no confession ever could have matched. In the stillness that followed the initial chaos, I began to understand something I had never been taught in childhood. Safety is not merely the lack of immediate danger. It is the presence of truth. And we had spent our entire lives without it, protected only by routines that masked a fault line running directly through the center of our family. The truth about Mom was not a single revelation. It was an avalanche that kept uncovering new layers long after the first impact. And in the quiet aftershocks of it all, one final reality settled heavily into me. The woman who raised us had been real in the ways that served her. The part of her that had endangered us had been real in ways we were never allowed to see. And now that both were finally visible, there could be no return to the version of her we once believed in. The aftermath did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like fog, quiet, slow, and everywhere. In the weeks following my mother's arrest, the world did not collapse dramatically around us the way I once imagined it would. Instead, it continued to move forward with a strange, almost insulting normalcy. School bells still rang. Grocery stores still opened. Neighbors still mowed their lawns. And yet, for us, every sound felt like it came from a different universe. My sister and I lived under protective discretion for a time, shuffled between safe places while the investigation unfolded in layers too complex for headlines to fully explain. Every day brought new fragments of information, never all at once, always in ways that made the truth heavier with each edition. My father was questioned repeatedly, sometimes for hours at a stretch. Each time he returned from those sessions, he looked older. Not from physical exhaustion alone but from the weight of reinterpreting an entire marriage through the lens of deception. He spoke less about anger and more about grief, the quiet mourning of a life that had never existed in the way he believed it had. I began to understand that betrayal does not always explode. Sometimes it erodes, dissolving the foundation beneath your feet until one day you realize you have been standing on absence all along. Every document he signed, every timeline he clarified, every memory he re-examined carved away another illusion he once lived inside. The courtroom proceedings, when they finally began, were nothing like the dramatic scenes I had imagined from television. There were no shouting confessions, no sudden moral breakdowns. My mother sat composed behind her legal team, immaculate as always, her expression restrained, distant, efficient. When she looked at us for the first time across that room, there was no visible remorse in her face. Only calculation, measuring distance, possibility, impact. The woman who had once brushed my hair before school now regarded me with the same detachment she once used to rearrange financial records. That moment crystallized everything I had come to understand. The mother I remembered and the person she truly was could not coexist in the same body. One had always been a mask. Testimony unfolded in meticulous sequences. Experts traced money trails that spanned years and crossed borders. Victims spoke, sometimes haltingly, sometimes with quiet rage. They described lives disrupted with surgical precision, credit destroyed, identities fractured, futures stolen without confrontation. I listened to those stories with a growing, aching awareness that our family had unknowingly lived on the safe side of devastation only by coincidence. We had been protected not by morality but by convenience. When those people spoke, I finally saw the true scale of what my mother had done. Not just to us, but to strangers whose names she had manipulated as easily as we spoke ours at the dinner table. My sister attended only one day of the proceedings. After that, she could not bear the sight of our shared past being dismantled piece by piece in public. I did not blame her. She had lost her childhood overnight, and now she was being asked to understand it through legal transcripts and forensic terminology. That is not how healing works. So I went alone for her when I could, carrying both our griefs into rooms that smelled faintly of wood polish and procedural inevitability. I listened when I had to. I left when it became too heavy. Survival, I learned, is not a single decision. It is a series of small mercies you grant yourself without permission from anyone else. The verdict, when it finally came, arrived without ceremony. Guilty on multiple counts. Sentencing scheduled. The word guilty did not bring closure the way I once believed it should. It did not restore anything. It did not answer any of the questions that had haunted us since 2 a.m. It only confirmed what we had already accepted in our bones. The woman we ran from that night had not been misunderstood. She had been seen clearly at last. Justice in this form was technical. The emotional reckoning still belonged entirely to us. My father did not attend the sentencing. He said he had already buried the life he had lived with her, and watching the law carve the final lines into her future would not bring him peace. He was right. Some endings do not require witnesses to be complete. My sister and I stayed home that day. We cooked together. We talked about school. We watched something ordinary on television. It felt almost rebellious to refuse the gravity of that moment. But it was also necessary. Our lives could not remain tethered to her forever, even through consequence. In the months that followed, something unexpected occurred. The constant tension that had lived in the background of our home, even before we knew its source, began to lift. My father slept more deeply. My sister laughed more freely. The silence that once felt ominous now felt breathable. Our conversations shifted from survival to possibility. We began to imagine futures unshaped by secrecy. It was not happiness in the naive sense. It was stability earned the hard way. The town eventually moved on. New rumors replaced old ones. Our names faded back into the background of ordinary social noise. Only occasionally would someone look at us with the faint recognition of a story they half remembered, as if they could not quite place why our faces felt familiar. Those moments no longer pierced the way they once did. The truth no longer belonged to public curiosity. It belonged to our private reconstruction. My sister grew into herself again slowly, cautiously, like someone relearning how to trust ground that once vanished beneath her feet. She returned to soccer. She made new friends who knew nothing of the night we ran, nothing of the legacy we carried. And in that ignorance she found freedom. I watched her reclaim her youth in fragments. Loud music in her room, laughter that shook the walls, arguments over trivial things that proved how far she had come from fearing everything. Every ordinary rebellion felt like a victory. As for me, I carried the night with me in quieter ways. I learned to listen to instincts I had once doubted. I learned the difference between calm and safety. I learned that love, untethered from truth, can become one of the most dangerous disguises in the world. And most of all, I learned that survival does not always look like bravery in the moment. Sometimes it looks like obedience to a single sentence texted at the exact moment your life splits into before and after. Years later, my father would tell me that sending that message had been the hardest thing he had ever done. Not because it was risky, but because it confirmed that his marriage had already ended in all the ways that mattered. To choose us publicly, irrevocably, meant losing the version of his life he once thought was secure. I knew the moment I pressed send, he said once quietly, that whatever my life became after that would at least be honest. That honesty, earned at unimaginable cost, became the thing that finally saved all of us. My mother never reached out after sentencing. No letter. No request to speak. No attempt at explanation. In that final absence, I found a strange clarity. Some people do not ask for forgiveness because they do not believe they have done anything that requires it. And some worlds remain closed not by walls of punishment, but by the emptiness where accountability should live. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet enough to feel transparent, I still think about the 2 a.m. text. About how 4 words dismantled a lifetime of illusion. About how close we came to never knowing the truth at all. And I realize something now that I could not have understood then. Danger does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it whispers through routine. Sometimes it hides behind goodnight kisses and school lunches. And sometimes, the only warning you will ever receive is a vibration on a nightstand that asks you to trust instinct over comfort. We trusted it. We ran. And because of that, we lived. If this story gripped you, moved you, or made you question what safety really means within family, please like, share, and subscribe for more true-style suspense stories that uncover the deepest human secrets and survival.